is the very first episode of a show that I wasn't even sure I was going to do. I really didn't want to make this video. I wasn't even going to make this video. And I'd been thinking about the concept of this show for about 2 years, but wasn't sure it was a good idea because I thought it might bleed into my other activism, and I didn't want to do that. But some things happened, and I was, when you get that feeling in the bottom of your stomach about that's wrong, and I don't want to have to look back in history and say I didn't say anything and I didn't do anything. That compels me. So the fight for equality is what compelled me to write my book in 2011, get it published in 2012. It's also what compelled me to do my activism over the last 10 years. And the story that got all my activism started was the time that my father, who was Caucasian, took my mother and my tia, my aunt, to Texas in the 1970s. Now, in the 1970s in Texas, you could have signs up that said, dogs and Mexicans aren't allowed in the store. So my father, who's Caucasian, took my Mexican mother, my Mexican aunt to Texas. And of course, there was a coffee shop or pizza parlor that was not allowing Mexican service. My father jumped over the counter, put money down, and then served them coffee or made a pizza, and put up with, did that anyways, despite the fact that racist people in the area were upset. That story's motivated me. And it is from that place of always fighting against racism and always being intolerant of racism and always being intolerant of the forces who would be against diversity that compelled me to make this video, just so that people know where I'm coming from. So this is the first episode of the show called Counter Narrative. I was going to do this 2 years ago when we were talking about Russia collusion with Donald Trump in America, but I thought that it might be seen as self-serving. So this one is the first time that I'm actually prompted to do the show. We'll see if it carries on. Anyways, today's show is all about Ukraine, and it's all about, are there Nazis or not in Ukraine? And is it a problem or is it not? So the narrative right now, by the media, by the United States government, by the European Union, and by the West, not the global South, but the West, is that no Nazi problem in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is saying there is a Nazi problem in Ukraine, and that is a total lie, and there's absolutely nothing to it, and it's total propaganda from the Russians in order to justify their barbaric and illegal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine over this month and last month. That's the narrative. Ukraine, no Nazi problem. Yeah, Russia says there's a Nazi problem, but that's just all garbage. There's nothing to it. These are peace-loving Westerners who support Western values and are horrified by the Holocaust. And there's absolutely nothing to the rumors that there's a Nazi problem in Ukraine. And the main source of evidence of that is President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Jewish and is in Ukraine. So that's the narrative. Now we're going to spend the entire rest of the show covering the counter narrative. Now, again, I wasn't going to make this show, but the amount of ignorance is just getting too high for me to tolerate. I have a limit on the amount of garbage that the news can put out before I start getting upset. I'm Latin. We get passionate. Our emotions take over. Fortunately, I've been able to train my emotions to focus on getting the truth out. So here's the counter narrative to that. There's a gigantic Nazi problem in Ukraine. It's huge. Ukrainians are kind of sympathetic to the Nazis in general, and they are kind of sympathetic to the Holocaust happening in general. And they really don't see a problem with the far right or neo-Nazis. In fact, they're pretty much cool with it. And the fact that they have a Jewish president means nothing. While he's Jewish, his understanding of how the West sees the Nazis and the Holocaust is not the way that we see it. So that man is Jewish, of course, and I'm sorry that his family went through bad things because of his Jewish heritage in the past. But his understanding of the horror of the Nazi Party and of the Holocaust is not shared by the West. And nobody wants to hear that right now. So I'm going to prove to you that there is a gigantic Nazi problem in Ukraine. It is widespread. All of the Ukrainians are in on it. They are all tolerant of it, and therefore they are all responsible for it. And having a Jewish president has done absolutely nothing to mitigate that. That's the counter narrative. You heard the official narrative. It's widespread. It's out there. Now I'm going to show you the counter narrative. And the counter narrative is not something you're going to see on mainstream TV. So nobody's talking about this. Nobody's covering this. This is probably a video that's going to get trashed, and my name's probably going to be ruined because I even said this, but I got to speak the truth. By the way, if you look down below, you can see marcus.ruiz.evans@gmail.com. The show's called Counter Narrative with your host, Marcus Ruiz, Mark Evans. So Marcus.Ruiz.Evans@gmail.com. If you don't like anything you see, if you think I got any facts wrong, if you want to debate me, if you just want to send death threats or hate mail, send it. That's the email to do it. Isn't the first time I've dealt with it, won't be the last. So let's get right to the show. Now, initially, I want to show you something. This is what started my quest for truth. Hopefully you can see this. So this email came to me. Call for change. Call for change is in solidarity with Ukrainian people. Stand with Ukraine. Russia's premeditated, unprovoked, and brutal assault on the people in the country Ukraine has shocked the world. We strongly encourage you to consider the list of action items below that has been compiled in support of the people of Ukraine. And this is the one that caught my attention. The American Jewish Committee was supporting this email. And they're talking about sending support to Ukraine. So I said to them, now this email came from Sylvia Russell, and I emailed her, I heard one of the political parties in Ukraine is a neo-Nazi group. Is there any truth to that rumor? Yes, but they don't have any seats in parliament, so they don't have a voice on how things are done. It's similar to our country. Warmly, Sylvia Russell. Now, Sylvia Russell is the person who's leading this, or is a leader in this call for change, and she's going out and saying, hey, help Ukraine, right? And I said, I heard there's neo-Nazis there. Is there any truth to this rumor? No truth to it all. They don't have any representation of the government. It's exactly like here in America. No problem. Let's move forward. And then I said, well, NBC News is reporting this week that there are neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian parliament. Exactly the opposite of what she said. And they have statues honoring Nazis spread throughout the country. I was all for tearing down Confederate statues in America, and I'm horrified by the Holocaust. To which Sylvia Russell responds, the Holocaust was horrific. We also need to make sure those kind of groups don't gain prominence in our own country. Very scary. Do you see what she did there? She said, help Ukraine. And I go, there's neo-Nazis in Ukraine. No, there's not. They're not even in parliament. NBC News is saying there is neo-Nazis and they are in parliament, a direct contradiction of what you're saying. She does not address that and goes, oh, the Holocaust was horrible. To which I respond, okay, but you asked me and others to donate to a cause that you agree had no neo-Nazis attached to it. That you asked me and others to donate to a cause that you agree had neo-Nazis attached to it now. Is that a good idea? I think our wires must have gotten crossed. I'm not asking for donations at all. Again, deflecting the issue and not dealing with it. Now, initially I was going to leave it there, but then I had family members going, Mark, why on your Instagram page are you talking all this smack and trash on Ukraine? And I even had a close friend go, why are you attacking Ukraine? And I go, how am I attacking Ukraine? With facts from mainstream sources that are true? I mean, is that what I'm doing to attack Ukraine? I'm citing hard facts from mainstream sources that are true. And I, as a minority, as a brown-skinned man, am horrified that the Nazi Party still exists or that anyone on the surface of the planet would be supporting this group. And I'm horrified that my fellow Americans, who include Black and brown and Asian people, are inadvertently supporting this. Yeah, people are saying I'm attacking Ukraine. People are saying I'm totally wrong for saying there's Nazis in Ukraine. And as I showed you right now, those people saying that are completely ignorant and don't know what they're talking about. It took me 10 seconds to type in Nazis in Ukraine and find that NBC News article, which directly contradicted what that donation charity group was asking about. And yet they were completely unaware of the issue and they gave misinformation. I thought fake news and misinformation was a bad thing. Why are liberals doing it then? And And I thought standing against Nazis was a good thing. Why am I being attacked for doing so? So let's frame the problem. Eugene Finkel, an associate professor at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, I would consider the KKK in the US a much bigger problem than the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Remember that. This is an expert quoted in the news saying, bigger problem with Nazis in America and KKK than Nazis in Ukraine. Here we go. Here's another expert. Alexander Ritzman at the Counter Extremism Project in Berlin says the far-right element in Ukraine's army is no different than what's been detected in other militaries, such as in the US. He's another expert also being quoted in the news. And finally, the claim that neo-Nazis or far-right groups hold any significant power in Ukraine is absurd by Jared McBride, an adjunct history professor at UCLA. So Jared McBride, history professor at UCLA. Neo-Nazis don't have any sway in Ukraine at all. Alexander Ritzman, Center for Counter-Extremism in Berlin. The neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine's military is exactly the same problem as in Americans' military. No big deal. Eugene Finkel, associate professor at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. The KKK in the US is a bigger problem than neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's what they're saying. Well, let me show you what's going on in Ukraine, and then let me show you how we handle it in America to prove that all three of these professors are dead wrong and they're lying to you. Something I do well. I like taking out professors and showing how they lied. We did this a lot with CalExit. There was about 20 different professors that went on TV about CalExit and said secession's illegal, and the Supreme Court said so. That was a total lie. The Supreme Court said secession is illegal if you do it unilaterally, but it is legal with, quote, consent of the states. So if I hadn't gone through CalExit and if I hadn't had 20 professors lie on TV about the law when I knew they were lying, I wouldn't be here, because I would think, well, there's so many experts, it must be true. But I've seen multiple experts come out of the woodwork and straight up lie and misinform the public, especially about the legality of secession and the non-acknowledgement of Texas versus White, the only Supreme Court case after the Civil War to discuss that. But let's get into Ukraine. So I'm going to do share screen and just walk you through the evidence bit by bit, like I do, so you can see it's all here. Okay. So part one. Israel and Poland slam glorification of Nazi collaborators in Ukraine. Here's something you're probably not going to hear a lot about. I didn't even know about this, and I had been yelling and screaming about Nazis in Ukraine for the last 2 months. No one told me this article. I didn't find it in anything. Barely just found it digging up. But basically, following nationalist march in Ukraine in honor of a Nazi collaborator, the ambassadors of Israel and Poland protested the glorifications of Holocaust-era war criminals. In a joint letter on Thursday, Jolin and Bartosz Siechocki accused the city government of Ukrainian capital of Kiev having waved the Stefan Bandera banner, a reference to a portrait of the Ukrainian Nazi collaborator that was hung from a municipal building at the end of January 1st, March, honoring Bandera's 111th birthday. So, Israel, the land full of Jewish people, and Poland, the land that had a lot of Jews killed, are saying they are disgusted with Ukraine's behavior because the entire city of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine and the largest city, thought it was a good idea to hang up a banner to Stefan Bandera, who was the Nazi collaborator who helped get about 1.2 to 1.6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. So this isn't just a little party. This is the city and the capital, the largest city in Ukraine, saying, you know what's a good idea? Let's hang a banner of a Nazi collaborator who killed over 1 million Jews in the center of downtown. And it was so horrible that the government of Israel and Poland criticized them for doing that. That doesn't sound like a small embrace of Nazism. Again, not something you're going to hear. There's the reference. Here's another one. 74% of Greeks disapprove of government handling of Ukraine crisis and want Greece to become neutral. Why would they do that? 74% of Greeks are dissatisfied with the government's handling the Ukraine crisis, according to a poll. Okay, let's go down here. This is an unsurprising shift since most people, at least 66%, were against sending weapons to Ukraine, fearing they could end up in the hands of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion that had been persecuting ethnic Greeks in Mariupol since 2014. So that's the neo-Nazi battalion in Ukraine. They are seeking out and hunting down Greeks because they're not white people, according to them. And the people of Greece now, 74% of them say, we don't want to back Ukraine because there's neo-Nazis there. By the way, Ukraine and Zelensky thought it was a good idea to appear on TV with two neo-Nazis flanking him on TV to the Greek government, asking for help. In response, the Greeks freaked out. So this is, you saw one with Israel freaking out because they put a poster up in the city, in the capital, backed by the mayor and the people, to a Nazi collaborator. Then here's now. And the Greeks are going, why did you show on TV with two Zelensky, with two Nazi collaborators? Yes, the Jewish president of Ukraine showed up on TV with two Nazis to the Greek government, and the Greeks freaked out. Now, because he did that, a majority of the Greeks are saying, we don't want to have any help with Ukraine because those people are tied to the Nazis. So that's Israel, Poland, and Greece saying, wow, you've got a real big Nazi problem, and we, our entire government, are horrified by that. Here you go. Nazi hunters give low grades to 13 countries, including Ukraine. This is in 2011. The Simon Wiesenthal Center. Simon Wiesenthal was the top Nazi hunter in the world. He hunted down more Nazis than anybody, and he made a institution dedicated to hunting down Nazis. And after he died, his institution kept trying to hunt down Nazis, and they tried to go after anybody who was part of the Nazi regime. Now, the Simon Wiesenthal Center in 2011 gave a failing grade to Ukraine, saying it has, to the best of our knowledge, never conducted a single investigation of a local Nazi war criminal, let alone prosecuted a Holocaust perpetrator. So Ukraine, supposed to be Western, supposed to be reformed, no Nazi investigations, never perpetrate a Holocaust person who helped that go. That's the government. And that's also under Zelensky. So Zelensky has yet to prosecute one person, even in absentia, even after they're dead, for being a Nazi war criminal or a Holocaust perpetrator. That's the Simon Wiesenthal Center saying this, the top Nazi hunting group, and this is in the Ukrainian news. By the way, they never fixed this. So they've gotten an F by the Jews who hunt Nazis. Ukraine has received an F for being so horrible at not allowing any investigations. They're basically the worst in the world, according to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, for blocking investigations into neo-Nazis and the Holocaust, even though 1.2 to 1.6 million Jews died in Ukraine. Let's keep going. Ukraine makes birthday of Nazi collaborator a national holiday. And they did that in 2018, and bans books critical of anti-Semitic leaders. So in 2018, this is, and remember, Euromaidan happened around 2014, right? So we're way past Ukraine broke from Russia and said we want to be more Western, and we're way past that, and we're into the times where Ukraine says they want to be Western, and they're working with America and Europe. While they're working with America and Europe to become more Western, having already broken away from Russia, they decided it'd be a good idea to make the birthday of a Nazi collaborator a national holiday and make it illegal to criticize this Nazi. Ukraine's parliament, the entire government, has officially designated the birthday of a prominent Nazi collaborator as a national holiday, while also banning a book that criticized the anti-Semitic national leader. Banning books was something the Nazis did. Now here's the Ukrainian government banning books to protect Nazis and making a holiday of it. By the way, this holiday hasn't been undone. January 1st has now been set aside in the country to remember Stephen Bandera, the Jewish Telegraph Agency reported. Bandera was a Ukrainian nationalist who joined forces with the German Nazis in World War II because he believed they would help his country gain independence from the now defunct Soviet Union. All right, let's go on. This is one of my favorite ones. This is a far-right battalion, has a key role in Ukrainians' resistance. Its neo-Nazi history has been exploited by Putin, by Tara John, Tim Listener, CNN. This is March 2022. So this is CNN saying this. And I'm not going to read the whole article to you, but I'm going to point out some of the juiciest quotes from them. This is CNN saying this March. And they're also saying it's a problem because it allows Vladimir Putin to point at this and go, see, that's why I invaded. So you're actually helping Putin by leaving this neo-Nazi problem intact. Let me show you some of the quotes from this article. Here you go. We're going to go over them one by one. The battalion still operates as a relatively autonomous entity. That's referring to the Azov battalion. So you're going to hear about how they were absorbed into the Ukrainian National Guard, and therefore it's not any problem. That's what Zelensky's saying. That's what Western leaders are saying. But how absorbed are they if CNN in March is reporting that they operate relatively autonomously? That means they do things on their own independently from the rest of the military. So how can you be thoroughly absorbed and reformed in the military, yet still operate relatively autonomously? That's what CNN said last month. The Azov element within Ukrainian armed forces, and it's an effective element at that. So even CNN's reporting that the Ukrainians view the neo-Nazi battalion as highly effective in fighting the Russians. The Azov's leadership openly espoused white supremacist views and cultivated links with similarly minded groups and individuals in the West. So not only are they neo-Nazis in Ukraine, but they're recruiting Nazis from around the world to come and join them and learn how to fight. That's exactly what ISIS did. ISIS wanted a terrorist caliphate, and they weren't happy just having their own members. They invited people from around the planet to come and join them in hating the West, beheading people, and creating a brutal caliphate. Those Americans who participated in that call have been arrested and are facing federal prison time. But the Azov battalion does the exact same thing. Are you a white supremacist? Come join us. We'll teach you about white supremacy. You can hang out with other white supremacists. We'll give you weapons, and we'll train you how to kill people for our next war, which we want to have to create a white ethno state. ISIS, Azov battalion, same methodology. Part one. There's going to be a second part coming up. Recapturing Mariupol in June 2014, the Russian-backed forces brought it hero status in Ukraine. How's a insignificant group that has no reputation or influence in Ukraine awarded hero status? Relatively autonomous battalion, effective fighting force, given hero status by all of Ukraine in 2014. But we're supposed to believe the Ukrainians don't really support Nazism. But they let this Nazi battalion run independently, and they gave it hero status. Okay. 2016, the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights accused armed groups on both sides of the Donbass conflict, including Azov, of human rights abuses. So in the Western news, you're only going to hear Russia did everything bad in the Donbass. The UN itself has said that's wrong, and that the Ukrainians also killed civilians in the Donbass, something Putin said, which the West is saying is completely not true. Well, here we have the UN in 2016 saying Putin's right. Again, not something you're going to see in the news. And it was the Azov battalion who committed the atrocities. But yet, these guys are heroes in 2014, but then they commit human atrocities attacking civilians 2 years later. The political party Belinsky formed the National Courts, which the U.S. Department of State described in 2018 as a nationalist hate group. So the reason that's important is that these Nazis hold office in the Ukrainian government. They actually have seats in the Ukrainian government. True, it's a small percent, about 2.ish%, but they actually have seats in the Ukrainian government and can influence policies and get to speak in their Congress. That group was called by the U.S. Department of State as a nationalist hate group. State Department of America said that's a nationalist hate group, and they're still part of the Ukrainian government 4 years later. The Azov movement has grown to include militias, a summer camp for kids, and paramilitary training centers. a summer camp for children. Now, at that summer camp for children, we're going to show you, they teach them how to fight. So get this right. A white supremacy group is asking other white supremacists from around the world to come and join them to learn white supremacy, get weapons training, and be ready for creating a white ethno-state. And they're creating summer camps to train youth in violent philosophies. That's ISIS again and the Nazi Party again. Those are things ISIS did and the Nazis. ISIS asked people from around the world to come join them in their violent ideology. All those people are prosecuted in America. And they made training camps for kids to indoctrinate them, which the world condemned. The Azov department is also doing literally the same thing, inviting white supremacists from around the world to join them and having military training camps for kids where they're indoctrinated in their philosophy. Training camps for kids to learn Nazism was something the Nazis literally did. The National Corps has repeatedly demonstrated its disdain for liberal values in its treatment of minority groups with few repercussions. Now, everything I'm reading to you right now is from CNN in March. CNN in March. That's not Fox News. That's not Joe Bob's website. That's CNN last month said, this group has disdain for liberal values and they get to beat up on minority groups with few repercussions. In Ukraine right now, white supremacist group gets to attack minorities and nobody does anything to them. That's what CNN is saying. 2018, the U.S. State Department found that the movement's militia attacked and destroyed a Romani or Gypsy camp in Kiev after its residents failed to respond in full view of the local police. So 2018, the U.S. State Department says, wow, this neo-Nazi white supremacist group went into the major capital and attacked an ethnic group in front of the Ukrainian police. So are the Ukrainian police all Nazis? I don't know, but they stood by while Nazis beat up brown-skinned people and did nothing about it. That's the official Capitol Police of Kiev. Again, not widely reported, and that happened 4 years ago. The Azov Battalion should be classified as a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. Department of State, exactly the definition for ISIS. Again, you're not going to see this. Back in 2015, the Azov Regiment itself claimed to have between 10 and 20% far-right extremists in the ranks, but those figures are possibly smaller today. Possibly, we don't know. We're just going off what they say. How do we know they're not lying? Azovs have enjoyed near impunity for violence aimed at minorities, unchecked in their efforts to build influence in the military and security forces, and have been normalized by Ukraine's senior leaders. That's from CNN last March, saying Ukraine's senior leaders have normalized this white supremacist group and their violence on minorities. That's CNN last March said that. Azov movement has recruited foreign fighters motivated by white supremacy to fight in the Ukraine. The Azov regiment was officially enrolled into the Ukraine National Guard in late 2014. Then Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko praised Azov as our best warriors. That's the president of the Ukraine, the Western Ukraine. This is after they left and they joined the West, saying, those Nazis, those are our best warriors. And I want to make sure, this is the president of Ukraine doing this, to give an award to their top racist. President of Ukraine did that. By the way, none of this has been condemned or undone by Zelensky. Just saying. Andriy Beletsky is a white supremacist who in 2014 wrote, the historic mission of our nation in this critical moment is to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade. That sounds like white supremacy ISIS. So let me show you again, just to prove this isn't made up. All those quotes come from this article. See that date? 30th March 2022? That's last month. That CNN saying, wow, these guys get to beat up minorities and the Capitol Police do nothing while watching it. And the president previously saluted them. And the current president did nothing to undo or condemn the president for doing that. And basically, the elites of Ukraine allow them to be normalized as a white supremacy group beating up ethnic minorities who have brown skin. CNN said that. So here's that little training camp for kids. Now, what they're pointing out is that posters came out recently saying that these camps were held this year, but the pictures came from 2014. They're not disputing that the camps happened. They're disputing that some people said the camps happened recently when the photos were taken in 2014. I want to be very clear. They are not disputing that it happened. So 2015, 2017, in Kiev, the capital, shows the Azov battalion training children. So let's take a look. Here you go. Here's a young child, about 6 or 7, being shown how to shoot an AK-47 assault rifle. Here's these children being taught how to march. Here's a young child soldier teaching other child soldiers how to stand at attention. Here's the youth being indoctrinated in the philosophies of the Azov battalion by an adult. So these are Nazi youth training camps. Hey kids, do you want to learn racism and act like soldiers and learn how to kill people? We'll teach you. That's exactly what the Nazis did. All right, let's keep going. Kiev renames major street to honor Russian Nazi collaborator. Stephen Bandera's nationalist group urged Ukrainians to destroy Jews and Poles in the 1940s. This came out July 2016, again after Ukraine went Western. Ukraine's capital, Kiev, on Thursday renamed its Soviet-era Moscow Avenue after the Russian figure accused by the Kremlin of siding with the Nazis in World War II. The decision is in line with the push against totalitarian regimes such as the Communist Party that Ukraine launched after February 2014 ouster of its Russian-backed leader and the decision by new leaders to anchor the country's ties to the West. So after they say, we're kicking out Russia and we want to be tied to the West in 2014, they rename a boulevard in their capital city after a guy who got 1.2 to 1.6 million Jews killed. We're leaving Russia. We're going to the West. Hey, you know what's a good way to celebrate that? Renaming a boulevard in our capital and largest city after a guy who perpetrated the Holocaust. So that's that. And here's the Times of Israel going, wow, that's horrifying. The Times of Israel going, wow, you guys are going to name a major street after a Holocaust guy. Huh. We Jews in Israel don't think that's good. Okay, and here we go. 2 streets in Kiev will no longer be named after Nazi collaborators. The court in the city ordered its municipality to undo a 2006 renaming of the streets for Stephen Bandera and Roman Shukiewicz. So this is in June 2019, okay? The streets are still up all the way up to 2019, and then they're saying, well, now we're going to take it down. A court in Ukraine issued an injunction against the naming of 2 streets in Kiev after nationalists collaborated with the Nazis. Okay, they were going to name 2 streets, not just one, after Nazi collaborators who perpetrated the Holocaust there. But Mayor Vitaly Klitschko on Wednesday wrote on Facebook that the city will appeal the ruling. So the mayor of a major Ukrainian city is saying, how dare you take down our street named after a Nazi who committed the Holocaust? He's not part of the Azov Brigade. This is a regular Ukrainian mayor saying, how dare you rename this street in 2019 after America's been helping them for years and Europe's been helping them for years. The mayor of a major city goes, no, we need this street honoring a Holocaust guy up, and I'm going to appeal these court rulings. The mayor said that. And then in Mistrality of Kiev. So the mayor of the largest city in Ukraine in 2019 said, we need to keep 2 streets named after Holocaust guys, and it's an awesome idea, and how dare the court stop us from doing that? Despite protests by Jews, this glorification became mainstream following the overthrow in 2014 of the former president Viktor Yanukovych. That was the Russians, who they call the Russian stooge. It ushered in a wave of nationalist sentiment. In 2015, a law passed making it illegal to insult the memory of any anti-Soviet fighter, including war criminals, declared a national history. So 2014, Jewish people are alarmed at the amount of Jewish hate and Holocaust support. Actually, 2014. And then this is after they leave Russia and they're going to the West. They're backing Nazis. They're having holidays for Nazis. They're renaming streets after Nazis. Jewish people and Jewish news are going, wow, that's horrifying and anti-Semitic. And in response, Ukraine says it's illegal to criticize anybody, even if they were a Nazi collaborator, and even if they're part of the Holocaust, and even if they got 1.2 to 1.6 million Jews killed. There it is, 2019. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones. So you're never going to hear about this. Ro Khanna is a Congress member here in California, and he's not talking about this anymore. Ro Khanna and Congressman David N. Cicilline, Rhode Island, are leading more than 50 House Republicans and Democrats in pushing the U.S. State Department to exert diplomatic pressure on Ukraine and Poland for recent incidents of state-sponsored Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism. 50 members of Congress in 2018 said, "Wow, Ukraine, you are so horrible about Holocaust denial and a wave of anti-Semitism. We have to make it an issue, and we're asking the official federal government to criticize you for that," in 2018. So sounds like these people felt that what Putin was saying was true. They just said it 4 years before him. How come we don't hear about this? All right, let's keep going. This Passover helped Ukrainian families rebuild their lives in safety. I love this because they're trying to push the whole there's not a Jewish problem in Ukraine. So this is why I had this. Okay. These are all of the cities in Ukraine where they have monuments to people who perpetrated the Holocaust. Cherkasy, Horishny, Paichov, Ruki, Zavi, Shukovich, Morshin, Pidpecheri, Lutsk, Dublani, Striyi, Zidolbunov, Berezani, Borislav, Bukav, Chervonohrad, Chorkiv, Droboyich, Dubno, Hornya, Horodenka, Hrabivka, Kalush, Kamyanka, Buska, Kolomia, Kozivka, Kremensk, Kusholnistya, Kiev, Liev, Milniev, that's Kiev, the capital, Mostieska, Mokolaiv, Mykitinitsy, Nizhny, Pidvodlochitsk, Romanivka, Sabir, Skol, Sinatian, Stary Sambir, Seredyniev, Bredzev, Sokol, Sosnivka, Strusiev, Terabovlia, Truskavets, Turka, Uzin, Veliki, Mosti, Verbiv, Zahirochka, Zalichiki, Sinatian, Zaitomir, Ivano-Frankivsk, Kamenetsky, and Rivne, and Kameniata, Buska, and Dobromir. So Nazi Holocaust perpetrators celebrated. See, there's a statue to him. And it's all over. Here's this Nazi collaborator statues. Jewish Independent nonprofit. Wow, another Jewish newspaper upset 2021, last year, by Lev Golinkin. That's a Jewish name. Look at all these Holocaust supporter statues in 30 different cities across the country. And look at this march in 2021 celebrating the Holocaust guy. More statues. There's Ukrainian flags underneath him. More statues to Holocaust guys. More statues to Holocaust guys. There you go, a little bit on the Holocaust. There's some Ukrainians marching at that time with the Holocaust. Here's some Ukrainians. Historical SS Volunteer Division, Galician Memorial March in Lviv, Ukraine, 2014, after they broke away from Russia, doing a march in support of these Nazi supporters. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, now we're going to get to part two. So I've thoroughly showed how the Ukraine government has seats in parliament, and the Ukrainian military has a neo-Nazi battalion that they view as heroes and great fighters, and were given award medals and are allowed to largely do their own thing within the Ukraine military, which does not sound like reform. And I've also showed you how multiple streets have been renamed after Holocaust people recently, how the mayor of Kiev backed that, how elites in Ukraine, according to CNN, have normalized white supremacy, and multiple streets have been renamed after Holocaust supporters, and 30 cities across Ukraine today have statues dedicated to the Holocaust, and that it was great. So neo-Nazis in the military, largely able to do what they want, can beat up minorities in front of the Capitol Police with no repercussions. The elites of Ukraine are backing them and normalizing them. Neo-Nazis in the parliament, while people in America literally don't know that and think that doesn't exist at all. And they do have power, and these people have said the Holocaust was great. And then statues to neo-Nazis around Ukraine and streets recently renamed after Holocaust people, and the mayor himself of the largest city in the capital saying, you better keep those Holocaust supporter names up on those streets. Now, the narrative is that, hey, there's barely any Nazis in Ukraine. It's not a big deal. Okay, well then, why are the Capitol Police looking the other way when the neo-Nazis beat up an ethnic group? And why are the people of Ukraine pushing for streets to be renamed in their largest and capital city? And why is the mayor of the largest capital city backing those streets being renamed after Holocaust people? And why are the statues to the Holocaust people still up? And why is the Azov Battalion allowed to exist at all? If they're so tiny and insignificant, disband them and jail their leaders or expel them from the country. I mean, Ukraine banned 9 political parties because of supposed ties to Russia. So they have no problem banning things, but they won't ban a tiny, insignificant military branch, and they won't ban a tiny, insignificant member of parliament. If they're so tiny and insignificant, ban them. And now Putin has nothing at all. But you're not. You're not banning them. You've never banned them. You've allowed them to stay in, and you're normalizing them, and they're growing in popularity, and they're taking over more streets in the capital. And up until recently, Jewish newspapers weren't having it and were terrified, including the state of Israel. But you won't hear any of that now because Zelensky's Jewish. And so therefore, there must not be a problem. Let's take a look at this. Obama won lots of votes from racially prejudiced whites, and some of them supported Trump. 2016. Now, when Barack Obama was elected in 2018 and in 2012, we were told America was a post-racial society. Obama was elected 2008, 2012. We were told America is a post-racial society. In 2016, with the election of Donald Trump, we're being told, actually, white supremacy is a big problem in America, and a lot of racist white people voted for Obama. Our idea that America was post-racial was wrong because these white supremacists voted for Obama doesn't mean they lost their racist ways and didn't try to back a racist and move the country to racism. So America had an African-American president. Therefore, we could point at him and go, well, there's no racism problem in America because the African-American president is African-American. But now we're saying, even if he was African-American, people were still racist when they voted for him, and they returned to racism, and racism got worse after he was out of office. So now I'm being told Zelensky's Jewish. The Ukrainian people voted for him. Therefore, there must not be any anti-Semitism. That's exactly what we said about Obama, and we were dead wrong. Racism got worse after Obama to levels we hadn't seen since the 1960s. And racist people did vote for Obama. So I'm supposed to believe that anti-Semitic people can't vote for Zelensky while still keeping anti-Semitism in their heart? We've literally seen while that country is pushing anti-Semitism while having voted for a president. And here's the thing. Show me where Zelensky criticized any of these actions and any of these people. He's president. He has incredible authority now, an incredible presence. If he says something, it gets done. This man could single-handedly ban these parties, ban these militia, ban these people, expel them from the country, tear down the street names, tear down all the statues, and issue an apology. Why has he done none of that if he's Jewish? Just questions to ask. Okay, a couple more things. Now, I wanted to point out these statements again. They don't hold any significant power in Ukraine. We just showed that that was wrong. Jared McBride at UCLA is dead wrong. I just showed you the facts. Alexander Pittman said the military having racists there is no worse than the American military having racists in it. And Eugene Finkel, who is a professor at Johns Hopkins University, says, I would consider the KKK in the US a much bigger problem than the Azov battalion in Ukraine. Remember these two quotes, okay? Nationalists, white supremacists in the military, no real different than America. White supremacists in the government or hanging around the country, no real different than America. Well, let's find out. Actually, give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Bear with me. This will be worth it. It's all good information. There's just so many facts to cover because none of this is covered by the news. So I literally have to show you everything so that you'll know I'm not lying and it's the truth. Okay. All right, now I'm going to show you some new quotes to show how these professors were all lying and really have it wrong and are misinforming you. So the first one I'll point out is that in America, we tore down Confederate statues. So these people are saying, hey, they got a racist problem just like us. No, they have statues up to Holocaust people in 30 cities. They've kept them up. They've made even more statues and they've renamed even streets after more racists. We've torn down almost all of our statues. So Ukraine kept all their Holocaust statues up and upped it by renaming streets after Holocaust people who perpetrated the Holocaust. Whereas in America, we ripped down all the racist statues. Total opposite trajectory. Handled it totally different than what they do. Here's military.com. And the military is talking about, again, this month or last year, it's a problem that there's white supremacists in the military. And you know what they're doing? They're actively seeking them out and to kick them out of the military. And they're trying to make sure that they never recruit any of them. So the U.S. military is reporting on a military site, we don't want white supremacists. You're not welcome in the military. We're actively seeking to expel you, and we are expelling you. That's totally opposite from saying, hey, neo-Nazi battalion, come into our military. We'll shield you. Keep beating up ethnic minorities in front of the police. It's cool. We're going to do nothing against you. We'll give you hero status. And you can still largely be autonomous and do whatever you want. Total opposite way of handling this in America versus that. Finally, here we go. Steve King removed from committee assignment over white supremacy remark. One Congress member made a casual remark about the Confederacy, and he was removed from power. One guy makes one comment about the Confederacy, and he's removed from power. In Ukraine, the people are avowed Nazis, and they are left in power, and they're not criticized. In fact, Zelensky, when asked by Fox News about the Azov battalion and the white supremacists in the country, had this to say, quotes, they are what they are. That was the Jewish president's response to these white supremacists. They are what they are. So in America, We actively seek out white supremacists from the military. We actively kick them out, and we actively try to not have them join, and we're condemning them. Whereas in Ukraine, they recognize neo-Nazis, bring them into the military, shield them politically, give them hero status, don't do anything about them, and allow them to operate largely autonomously. In America, if you say anything racist at all and you're in Congress, you get called out and asked to be removed from power or removed from assignments. In Ukraine, you can literally be a neo-Nazi and be part of the parliament, and they won't criticize you. They'll normalize your presence, and it's totally cool you're there. In America, we're ripping down all the statues to racism. In Ukraine, they're leaving all the statues to the Holocaust up and creating more and renaming streets after the Holocaust guys. And none of this is undone by the Jewish president. So these people have it completely wrong. Our trajectory and how we handle this is totally different than what they do. And it took me about 30 seconds to find that. But here we go, professors around the world lying to you and misinforming you. But we're not done. Even gets even worse. So a lot of people are saying, so what? You know, the Ukrainians got some Nazis in their Congress, which we would never tolerate for a second here in America. Just imagine somebody, I mean, they had the Confederate flag waved in Congress, and people lost their sanity in America. One guy waved the Confederate flag once, and people lost it. One guy in Congress made one comment about the Confederacy, and people lost it. In Ukraine, you can have people wear Nazi insignia and be part of the military and part of their Congress, and nobody removes them and nobody says anything about it. Now, some of the Western critique is, hey, these people are so small, they're only 2%, you don't need to pay attention to them. Which my response is, great, then get rid of them. If they're insignificant, they wouldn't get hero status. They wouldn't be recognized by heroes of the previous president. They wouldn't even be recognized in the military, and they have no seats in parliament. If you're handling this correctly and they're so small and insignificant, great. Remove Putin's talking point, kick all these people out of the country, imprison their leaders, ban them, and Zelensky issues a statement saying the Svoboda political party, the Holocaust statues, the Holocaust street renaming, and the Azov battalion are unwelcome and totally not Ukrainian at all and disgusting, and get out. We want nothing to do with you. You'll lose 2% max. And then you've gained more support from the West because people like we will shut up. And then Putin has no talking points. But you won't do that. You won't get rid of 2%. Why? Maybe it's because more than 2% of Ukrainians backed renaming 2 streets in the capital after Holocaust people. And maybe it's because the mayor of the capital said, I publicly back having this Holocaust street named this way. And maybe it's because the entire government has refused to do any investigations on people who perpetrated the Holocaust. That's not just the Azov battalion or this Svoboda political party that can make that happen. That's all of Ukraine. That's the mayor of the capital city doing that. That's the former president of Ukraine recognizing these people. Those streets were renamed in the capital. That was backed by the majority of the people of Ukraine. So these are actions that all of Ukraine has to be okay with. Secondly, all of Ukraine is not worried about having literal Nazis in their parliament and in their military. But the main talking point is, don't worry about it, they're only 2%. Well, here's this guy called Adolf Hitler. And in the 1930 German federal election, he too only had 2%. So Hitler had 2.6% of the vote, around what people are saying the amount of influence of the white supremacists in Ukraine have. And yet we know Hitler kept growing because people liked him and they eventually adopted his philosophy, and then the whole country voted for Nazis. So when I hear, oh, they're small, they're only 2%, I'm like, Hitler got 2%. And then he was normalized, like the Ukrainian elites, according to CNN, are doing with the neo-Nazis. And then he got seen as a hero, as the former president of Ukraine referred to the Azov battalion. And then he rose to full prominence and power And then the country backed all of his Nazi ideas. So Germany started off with 97% being against the Nazis, and they quickly moved to about 80% being for the Nazis within about 8 years. It wasn't 30, 40 years. It was about 5 to 8 years. They went from 2.6% to, I think, about 47% within about 5 years, and then eventually they captured 73, 80%. So nobody's bringing up that Hitler had 2.6 around the same amount of power as the Azov and the Svoboda political party. But here's the other thing. They're saying, okay, well, maybe Ukraine did participate in the German Holocaust, but they didn't really want to. It was because they were forced to, and they were scared of the Nazis. That is a total lie. Initially, the Germans were greeted as liberators by some of the Ukrainian populace. Now, why would that happen in the German invasion in 1941? Because in the 1930s, Russia forced a famine on the Ukrainians that killed millions of them. So the 1930s, Russia forces a famine on the Ukrainians and kills many of them. 1930s. Then we fast forward to 1940s. So 1930s, 32, 33, famine kills millions of Ukrainians. 8 years later, the Nazis come in to Ukraine and they are greeted as liberators. Why? It wasn't that the Ukrainians thought, hey, hating Jews is the greatest idea ever. It was that they were happy the Nazis were there. They wanted to be Nazis because they hated the Russians. And in order to please the Nazis, they enthusiastically backed the Holocaust. They're saying the absolute opposite, that these people were forced to participate in that. No, they were enthusiastic. They're also saying the absolute opposite, that 2 per 6 doesn't mean anything. That's a total lie. They're saying that the way that we handle things in America is the way that they handle things in their government, in their military, and in their populace, and that's a lie. We don't do things like they do in the populace. We don't do things like they do in the military. We don't do things like they do in the government. Adolf Hitler, 2%. Then he rose to power. Barack Obama had votes from numerous white supremacists, and then America became more racist. Additionally, I've been studying this topic for 2 months, and many of these facts are not widely projected, and they're not covered at all, and it's difficult to find them. And what we're being told is that Ukraine's all good for Jews, even though you have multiple Jewish newspapers and the U.S. State Department talking with great alarm about the amount of Nazis and white supremacist sentiment in the Ukraine. Obviously, Putin's invasion of Ukraine was bad and wrong. Obviously, shooting civilians is bad and wrong. Obviously, those were war crimes. But obviously, there is a neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine, and it is tolerated by all of Ukrainian society. And before Russia invaded, it used to terrify Israel, Jews around the world, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and Poland that lost millions of Jews. Now you won't hear any of that. Did that mean the problem go away? Zelensky's been president. Why hasn't he undone these things? And why does it mean that because he's Jewish, therefore there's no Jewish problem? Obama was elected, therefore racism went away in America? I know you know better. That's our first episode of Counter Narrative. Everything I said is backed up by facts, mainstream sources, and the truth. If you don't like what I said, please email me. I love to debate. I invite anybody who has a different opinion or thinks that I got it wrong to debate me live on video. You can say whatever you want. I'll let you go first for like 10 to 15 minutes. You can say whatever you want for 10 to 15 minutes uninterrupted. How I got it wrong, how I'm bad, all my facts are wrong. But then after your 15 minutes, I expect you to stick around while I explain the facts again. Nobody's going to give you that amount of audience. If you think I got it wrong, come and get me. Marcus.ruiz.evans@gmail.com down below. I stand by everything I said, and I look forward to anyone, anywhere, challenging me in a debate.